You're listening to A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast, brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name is Jeff Milo, and joining me on the podcast today is Rodi Brown.
Hi.
And Mary Grahame Hunter.
Hello.
And we're here to talk about, oh my gosh, we just got done talking about romance novels. We just got done talking about all the romance novels, almost. But we covered a lot. I came in here sort of thinking that I was playing devil's advocate, but also unfortunately actually being devil's advocate of the person who doesn't really read romance novels and has outdated perceptions of what they are. And boy, did I get schooled. Did I not get schooled, you two?
We were nice about it.
I like to think it was a gentle schooling,
yeah.
but I do agree it was a schooling.
Yes.
It very much was. It was an odyssey. I am in the audience with you today listening. These two put on a masterclass.
But that's important. I think that people need to hear someone who is skeptical or cynical about a genre and not necessarily defensive of their skepticism or cynicism, but like just go through the journey of them coming to see the light of something that they were unsure about.
Yeah,
Because so many of us went through a similar journey.
Yes,
I did.
Yes.
Right.
So why would I look down my nose at you?
Absolutely.
About something that, I was like, I was there 6 years ago.
This is a podcast no one can see. You can only hear it, but both Rodi and Mary Grahame watched scales fall from my eyes. So it was so great. But I should note that, we are in partnership with the Ferndale Project, and we have a book club that we meet monthly. And the book that we're reading this month is a romance novel. And what I was particularly excited to do this episode for is that there were lots of people at last month's book club. When I announced the next book club, they were like, a romance novel? That tone, that tone that the two of you have heard? So I'm hoping a lot of them tune in and they get schooled with me too. So
Gently scold.
It's a come to the light kind of schooling.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't want to turn you off. We want you in the ranks so that we have more people to conduct gentle schoolings on why you should read romance novels.
Because the point of these books at the end of the day is to leave people feeling happy.
Yep.
And I don't feel like that's something that we necessarily need to resist, especially right now. I feel like everybody can use a little extra happiness.
Golly, I could use some joy.
Right.
Well, we will start the episode properly. We will get to joy. We'll get to feelings. We'll get to all of that. And we're going to talk at first pre my enlightenment, where I open things up, I believe, with Fabio. Here's our chat. I think that we should first of all talk about what kind of romance novels we want to talk about, because folks might think that we're talking about the 90s paperbacks with Fabio on the cover, and that's certainly not what we're talking about here today, unless we are, because that would be a surprise to me.
That is not what I am here to talk about.
No, I actually have not read any of those because I was a child.
But yeah, I think that this is a genre that fans of it feel like they need to defend. Yes, don't you think? And
yes.
And I guess I'd love to hear your sides of it.
Okay.
Said fans of this novel, this genre.
Well, I will absolutely fight for romance novels. Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
You'll fight for love?
Yes, but specifically Happily Ever Afters, Jeff.
Yeah, okay. Here's the thing that I'll just drop on the table.
Yes.
Here's what I'm going to drop on the table, and then you can both fight me about it.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll pick up a romance novel, and I'll say, they're both staring at me. You guys can't see that. They're both staring at me. I can't finish this sentence. And I'll say, what's the point? Because I know it winds up with a happy ending.
That is the point, Jeff. That's the point. So maybe this is a good segue to talk about how I started reading romance novels.
I'd love to hear it. Let's go into that.
And so I am not here to discuss perhaps sort of the 90s stereotypical, but I am here sort of to defend, quote unquote, the bodice ripper. Because, yes, okay, so because I started reading romance novels at the end of my freshman year of college, and it was because I had just finished my second semester of finals. My brain felt like it had run a marathon, and I was just so tired. And I thought to myself, I want a book that is safe, that I can just enjoy.
Sure.
And I had come across a list on Book Riot of like a list of feminist romance authors, and I was like, interesting, that's a thing. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing. I definitely had an idea about like, these mass market paperback bodice ripper type books. But I recognized one of the names, Sarah McLean, because I had read her. She has one YA novel that I had read and just loved. And so I was like, oh, well, okay, I loved that book, which is like mostly about kissing. It's just a YA novel. And so I guess I'll try like one of her adult romance novels. And like, I started it at dinner time, and then I finished it the next morning before breakfast. Yeah. And she writes like the classic like Regency historical kind of like high heat mass market paperbacks that get talked about as quote unquote trashy. But I was like, this is so much fun. And it was like, the whole point was that I knew they were going to get together. So all of the fun comes from how. Okay. And like, is the author going to make me believe it? Because sometimes you read a romance and they get together and you're like, fake. I don't believe that is true.
That happens.
And so that's, that's like a romance that doesn't work. Like, they don't all necessarily work. But I do not want the stress of going in and being like, what's gonna happen? Like, they're gonna smooch at the end.
They're gonna smooch at the end, also, which is officially the title of this episode.
Also, knowing where it ends does not make the journey any less interesting.
No.
Okay.
Because just like other genres, like fantasy, to be fair, we know where a lot of fantasy novels are going to end.
We know the ring is going in the mountain.
Exactly. But it's not entirely about the ring falling into the pit of lava. It's about the journey and the separate journeys it takes to get there. I also had a similar experience post-college reading romance books because after I graduated, I went to a school where I did the Western classics in chronological order. So I was reading a lot of quote-unquote important books, not unimportant books. And it was challenging and it was a lot. And I did fine, but I was very fatigued in terms of reading by the time I was done. And I felt like I didn't know how to read for enjoyment anymore. And then my best friends were like, you want to go to this bookstore? It's called The Ribbed Bodice, and it's owned by two sisters because I am originally from Los Angeles, California. And they were like, and it sells primarily romance books. And I was like, sure, let's go. And then I walked in and Angel sang, and it was this beacon of like bright, beautiful light raining upon me, and I saw so many romance books of so many different types because I too was just like, oh yeah, they're just, Fabio.
I'm picturing red velvet, saxophones playing,
no,
rose petals falling.
Actually just like really nice wooden bookshelves and like just it was great.
Nice.
And then I picked up a couple of books, one of which was A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. And
going in the show notes.
I never looked back.
Nice.
And that kind of like cured my inability to read.
Yeah.
And then I was able to get back into other genres that I had previously enjoyed, like fantasy and real serious family drama fiction and things like that. But it was romance novels that cured me, so they're special.
We should put that on a t-shirt. Romance novels cured me.
Romance novels cured me. I think that you two are showing me that it can be an antidote to cynicism, perhaps.
Yes.
I certainly...
Because I'm the cynic who's like, oh, she met so-and-so on page 50, and I bet he's the suitor. I wonder if by page 300 they'll be dancing and in a ballroom or whatever. But, they didn't have a meet cute. They got off to a rough start. I wonder if this is... Sometimes I do that in a romance. But I'm a cynic.
And I know you say that though, but there's something about like a well-structured romance. So one of my all-time favorite romance authors is KJ Charles. And she, I think, is just this absolute master of structure. And it has a lot to do with that she was an editor for 20 years before she even started writing. And so it's not that I find her books predictable at all, but like I feel like I'm in such safe hands because I start reading her plots and I'm like, she knows exactly what's happening. And it's going to make sense. And it's just going to be really satisfying. Rodi, I'm glad that you brought up the gateway of like the ripped bodice as like the place that enabled you, because my enabling place was the library. And because I was like, okay, I mean, I'm going to try this new genre and I can try it completely like risk-free, because I had a Detroit library card, still do. And they've got a massive digital collection for romance. And so, like, I had my little Kindle Paperwhite. I was like, I can just go in and, like, shop for books for free in my pajamas. Everyone, please ask your libraries about their digital collections. This is my plea to you. It will make your life better. But because, like, so many romance novels come in series, like, it was so easy. It's like, oh, well, I liked this one book by Sarah MacLean. It's the first in a 4-book series. I had the rest of the series read by the end of the week.
Yeah, I love romance series because they are just like, remember that character that said hello to this one character in that book? Well, here's their story.
Sequel bait.
Exactly. And you don't have to read them sequentially.
Nope.
And they're wonderful. And some of my favorite romance series are written by Beverly Jenkins.
Yes. Beverly Jenkins. Why is that name so familiar?
Because she's amazing. One of the greats.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay.
Let me tell you about Beverly Jenkins. I love history.
Born in Detroit, we should note.
Yes.
I believe she's still local.
Yes,
That's
she
awesome.
is. She writes amazing historicals. And then in every single one of her books, she will like tell you about her process of research and how she just added certain things into the story based off of that research and why she writes the way she does. And it's amazing. And she's wonderful. And I love her. And I came in here with an agenda to push Beverly Jenkins as much as possible.
That's excellent.
I adore her. So.
And these are some excellent book covers.
Her book covers are fantastic.
They are so good. And since we have opened that door, you came with your agenda to tell people about Beverly Jenkins, which is a good and true agenda. My agenda is to start a fight about romance book covers.
Okay, because there's a trend going around.
There is a trend going around.
You'll see it in bookstores and libraries.
You sure will.
And you will see, usually the joke is, dude, where's my shirt? And it will be a collection of romance novels. And that's a trope. That's a trope of a gent prominently displaying pectorals. Anyway, continue with your defense.
See, what's funny is that is not the trend I was thinking of at all.
Uh-oh.
I am thinking of the kind of pivot to illustrated covers trend.
Yep, we can move away from the ripped bodice style novels. I think this is...
Well, should we, Jeff?
Well, I mean,
should we?
I could continue talking about shirtless Fabios.
No, this is actually a troubling trend to me.
Wait, the shirtless dudes or the new, like, very animated looks?
Okay, to be clear, I like a lot of the illustrated covers.
There are some great illustrated covers out there.
This is one of them.
Quick shout out to Casey McQuiston.
Yes.
With red, white, and royal blue.
And I think One Last Stop is an even better illustrated cover.
Oh my God, One Last Stop has a fantastic...
Quick shout out to Helen Hoang.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Quick shout out to Telly Hibbert. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Stop naming my favorite authors.
Fabio.
This is the thing.
Colin Firth. Okay.
There is a kind of... how do I want to put this? It's as if they're trying very hard to distance themselves from the traditional mass market dude where's my shirt covers, and so they're pivoting towards these illustrated covers that are a little bit more palatable, a little more friendly to look at, and I'm not always here for it.
I'm not here for it because I find it very difficult to... Like, a cover is supposed to telegraph certain things about the book to me. And I have a very hard time gauging heat level. I have a very hard time gauging tone.
Yep.
When everything is illustrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Take something like Alexis Hall's, like, Rosalind Palmer Takes the Cake, which is a book I did enjoy very much. There is just... there are ways in which that is like a gut punch of a book. And again, very enjoyable. I didn't feel like the tone matched the kind of cartoony bake-off style cover.
Sure.
And whereas if you look at something like Joanna Shupe's Uptown Girls trilogy has kind of the classic historical, they're not quite clinch covers, but sort of that I just adore. Like, I think the colors are gorgeous. I think that tells you a lot about you are getting this classic 350 page, you know, historical tropey type of book.
That looks
You
classic.
know who also has really great covers like this? Stacy reads books. She also writes historicals. Fantastic covers going on there. Yes.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, those are beautiful.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's exactly what's going on. For
Exactly.
example,
I'm going to put some examples on our website so that folks can see the stark difference.
How
Because
have I
already
never heard of her?
I am made a believer
Really,
just by the
really.
Yeah.
aesthetic.
Exactly.
it's so good.
Exactly. And I think that there are some authors like Kat Sebastian, for example, who is another of my like top tier, and she does queer historical romance, which is like my ultimate. And she her first books are sort of the classic like Avon covers but make it gay, and then now she's writing like mass market or trade paperbacks that are getting really lovely illustrated, like Queer Principles of Kit Webb, Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes. Like, those are covers that I think sell the historical setting really well and the tone.
Sure.
But I think that particularly with contemporaries, I find that the illustration trend very frustrating.
You don't know what you're going to get. As a matter of fact, I'm glad that you brought up TikTok because there are some very, very, very spicy novels that are very popular on TikTok, which is great for those authors because it's bringing them notoriety. It's getting their books back on shelves, or maybe on shelves that they weren't previously, that are now getting illustrated covers where you have no idea what you're getting into.
Oh, no.
And that's also a matter of, you know, trade paperback versus mass market. And also, in my opinion, it's a way of kind of sanitizing these books a little bit.
Yeah.
To try to make them more appealing to
as
the
though
average
there's
reader.
something to be ashamed of.
Exactly.
Because I'm definitely someone like I love reading like Joanna Shupe's book in public because I'm like, say something to me.
Right.
Like,
Nice.
oh, I'm on the bus.
Yeah.
Like, do you have an opinion?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
In part because like I don't think that that's a thing to be like ashamed of reading or to like apologize for reading. So I like the covers that are sort of like out there.
Right.
Well, I think that it's worth noting from my perspective is that romance took a bit of a hit during the 90s because I'm coming at it with that whole early 90s Fabio stuff. And then we had the wave of rom-com movies, which became a whole thing. And then you had that whole sub-genre Hallmark Lifetime romance movies. And then we had Titanic. So I think that romance was I don't know, it is seen as something, and maybe it is usually coming, I'll just put myself on the hot seat, maybe it is coming from like the straight white cisgender dude who's just not comfortable in his own skin and has insecurities, and he's like, ew, you know what I mean?
No, that's fair.
I don't know if it's like...
that makes sense.
And I think that's a good point about the chronology, because it sounds like you and I started reading romance around the same time.
Yes.
And by the time we did, I think that there was already... I don't want to say like a shift, because I think a lot of people, I mean, like Beverly Jenkins has been writing romance for a long time and like has like always been here. So I don't want to like negate the folks who like are like, hi, yeah, we've always been here. We've always been doing the cool stuff. But I hadn't thought about that.
I forgot about another can of worms to open.
Oh yeah?
That may have caused problems here. It's called 50 Shades of Grey. I just opened it and I put it on the table. That's a whole other thing. That's
just a lot of heavy sighing about
it
that
is
book
because
there's
here's the thing. It's
it grew out of Twilight fanfic. Isn't that the true
Exactly.
story?
It grew out of Twilight fan. So dear listeners, you can't see Rodi and I just staring into the middle
I
of this.
didn't even plan on pulling out that wild card.
I think that my sort of opinion there is like 50 Shades of Grey did not invent like kink romance or erotic romance or BDSM romance.
It didn't even do it well.
And it didn't do it well. So like there's already erotic romance out there. Go read better erotic romance.
Yeah, and you guys don't have to solve it or defend it. I'm just saying it was another symptom of like it taking a step back.
Yes,
that's a good point.
The thing about that was too that I don't want to sound like I'm necessarily complimenting those books, but because of how popular they were, because of how unabashed women were about reading it, that did kind of like
worth noting.
It's worth noting because I was just like, I was in high school when that came out, and I would see on the bus both classmates and, you know, older grown women reading that book openly and loving it and going to see the movies and things like that. And so while I don't particularly find it well done, I do, to an extent, respect what it did.
Oh, yeah.
There's the value to the way in which it drew, like, women particularly talking about desire into the public eye.
Yeah.
And I hope that we are, like, leaps and bounds of more nuance into that discussion now.
Heck because I think that's worth noting that I've completely forgot about that factor of it. It did feel like there was a fan base that was saying, yes, I am reading this, almost in that same, like, go ahead and say something kind of way. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And I will say, and I think you were kind of getting into this, Mary Graham, and this is going back to something right before you mentioned 50 Shades of Grey, which is that while we have had our giants in the field, like Beverly Jenkins, I'm just going to compliment her throughout this entire podcast, who have been there doing the work for a very long time, the romance genre has grown to be far more diverse, not just in the backgrounds of the authors, the characters, but also, you know, it's not just cisgendered people writing romances anymore. And it's actually quite wonderful. And that also is kind of a huge deal in terms of these things for me, because you have authors like, for example, Alicia Rai, who wrote The Right Swipe,
who is also hilarious on TikTok.
Yes, she's also quite
she's excellent at her job and also really great.
Yes, her series. I've read 2 of the 3, and I really, really, really enjoyed them. Nice. Of course, all of the other Courtney Milan.
I was just about to bring up Courtney Milan because I was gonna say one of the things that I think helps romance be successful in its sort of diversifying functions is that independent publishers and independently published authors, self-published authors, there's so much high quality self-published work happening in romance that allows people to, like, not be beholden to big 5 publishers saying, like, oh, this won't sell, well, watch me sell it and get to keep all the profits. And Courtney Milan in particular used to write for Harlequin, and I've read the books that she published with Harlequin. I think they're fantastic, and she has been self-published for an extremely long time, and there's something, her agent is so fantastic that it's really easy to get her self-published stuff through Overdrive, which is how I first read it. And so just, like, watching what she does with romance as, like, a story form, like she recently, what's the one, The Duke Who Didn't, is this book that she wrote that's like, you think that there's going to be that, like, someone's been lying the whole time and there's this big deception, you think there's going to be this big moment of betrayal, and then there just isn't, and it's not a letdown, it's there's conflict and tension that comes from other parts of the book, right? And she also just, her emotional stakes are just wallop me. And there's this fantastic, the first book I read by her is The Suffragette Scandal, which is, like, on my keeper shelf forever and ever, and has this amazing moment where the heroine is a suffragist, and the hero is like, you're fighting so hard to, you know, gain an inch, and okay, let's say women get the vote, no one's ever going to elect a woman as the prime minister. If they do, they're never going to take her seriously. And the heroine says, I'm not trying to empty the Thames with a thimble. I'm trying to water a garden. Right. And I'm gonna scream. It's so good. And I don't remember how I got here because I started thinking about Courtney Milan and now I can't stop talking.
Well, but another book of hers where she subverts, in a way, a trope is called Trade Me. Yes. And essentially that book is a billionaire trades place with someone who is not a billionaire, because, you know, I love romance books, and I also like to make fun of them sometimes and some of their tropes. Everybody talks about, oh yeah, there's always a billionaire or a duke or a cowboy. Yes. Because cowboys are a huge deal And I love it when authors are just like, yeah, I write in this genre. We have these built-in tropes. Let me just have fun with it and do something. And I mean, that concept isn't new. It's not like she invented it, but the way she writes it, the way she writes these characters to have such, you know, emotional intelligence while they are also working through very serious, you know, things in their personal lives and battling with internal issues. And it was just wonderful. And it was so unexpected because I think that was the first thing I read by her.
I remember her talking about writing Trade Me because she was like, I will only be able to write a billionaire if I can spend the whole book making fun of him, which I respect so much because I have noticed in my years of reading romance that I have become, and because I mostly read historical, which often traffics with a lot of rich people, I've gotten very picky. Like I now am bored rather easily by the like there's a million dukes everywhere and everyone's at like Almax type of plot. So I really enjoy books where rich people have to be at least a little bit embarrassed about it. Or I also, the only kind of the lost heir plot is Cat Sebastian has a lost heir plot where the guy is like, oh my God, the woman I love is never going to love me now that I'm a peer. Like she's a radical. Like she runs a magazine that's constantly on the verge of her getting arrested. Like, she's never going to love me if I'm a duke. I eat that up.
Yeah, I do really like some modern royalty books.
Well, Alyssa Cole.
Yes, Mary Graham knew exactly where I was going with this. Alyssa Cole and her Reluctant Royal series. I mentioned that A Princess in Theory was the book that cured my inability to read. And I have read every single one of the books, including the novellas, which are also great and also include covers, you know, LGBT plus romances, and they're just so good. And the covers,
look at
once
those.
Again,
why
covers.
Would you have an illustrated cover? And these are contemporaries. And what I love is that you get some of the best things about like a classic historic cover, like the colors, the poses. You get those with these contemporaries, and they just, again,
so good.
They tell me so much about what that book is gonna be like.
And it's so good.
I mean, talk about what can't Alyssa Cole do, because her Loyal League series, which is this trilogy set in the Civil War, aka you would one of the most unromantic, you would think, periods of history, hands down ever. Alyssa Cole, like the genius she is, just writes these beautifully researched, gorgeously written, like, I love all the characters, like, because
let me tell you, as a person, once again, who likes history, the idea of a romance written during the Civil War actually makes me break out in hives. Like, it stresses me out so much. And when I saw that she wrote them, it was after I read these books, and I kind of looked at it, and I was just like, okay, I really like her, but I'm not sure. So I, like, walked away from them, you know, metaphorically, and, like, went back, like, maybe, and I was like, I don't know. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to try one and see how I feel about it. And oh my God, it was so good. And I was just like, okay.
And the first two have black heroines and white heroes.
Yes.
So she's playing on like extra hard level.
Yes.
I think.
She is.
And yet
she did a really good job. And I was just like, thank you for showing me that this can be done, because I'm not going to lie, I'll probably never read another romance set during that time period if she's not writing it, unless, obviously, Beverly Jenkins, who writes a ton during that time period. But, you know, I have a level of trust for her.
Also a lot of reconstruction.
Yes.
Which is, like, reconstruction, like, I don't know if this is... I've got sort of a wish list of, we've got enough Victorian romances, we've got enough Regencies, like, what else do we want to see? I mean, I know that Beverly Jenkins has written a ton in the Reconstruction, and I need to go read, like, all of them, but I think that we should just, even more of that would be sweet.
100%. The Regency is like this sweet spot where you get swords and guns, and so people like to play with that, but the thing about me is that I'm like, let's go all the way back to just swords.
Yeah.
Or let's focus on these other time periods.
So I studied a lot of medieval literature in college, and And medieval romances used to be a big thing in like the 80s and the 90s somewhat, but a very specific, not particularly accurate idea of the Middle Ages.
Exactly.
And now the only person I can think of who comes to mind who writes like really well-researched medieval romance is Elizabeth Kingston. And so more of that, please. Also, I feel like, not to keep it in Europe, but like early modern era, like where everyone, Shakespeare sells. I don't know. Don't write about Shakespeare,
even
but
his non-romances that people call romances, Romeo and Juliet.
It's not
looking at you.
So,
but just a quick aside, because I feel like Regency and like historical romances tended to be the sort of safe zone, like a lot of those, the Fabio covers, and obviously we've talked about that, but that's what makes this more modern romance movement so great, is that there are so many fantastic contemporary romances written, like Talia Hibbert. I'm also going to throw Rebecca Weatherspoon in there. Her books are fantastic.
Okay.
Like, if I find out she wrote something, I am going to run to her books. By the way, that is a lesbian romance right there.
Treasure by Rebecca Weatherspoon.
Yes, I love. She's so good. She does not limit herself to any sort of romantic conventions at all. She's just like, I got this idea. I am going to go with it. So
I think it goes without saying that anyone who says they're unsure about romance novels or claims they do not like romance novels has not read a romance novel recently.
or hasn't read the right
or
one.
Just hasn't read the
Yeah, because I mean, it's a huge genre. Yeah. It's just enormous. And I mean, we haven't touched paranormals. We haven't touched, like, there are all of these sub-genres.
Yes.
And like, there are subgenres that, like, I completely pass over. Like, I don't read inspirationals. It's, but that some people, that's what they love. And that's all they read. And that's totally great. And it's such a huge field. And I love that I think there's something for everyone. And I'm particularly loving that, like, as someone who reads a lot of queer romances, it's not like you have, like, all of romance and then over here in this corner are, like, the queer ones. Like, I'm reading right now A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsk, which is a historical fantasy queer romance. And which is like amazing. It checks off it's like Edwardian, there's magic. It's all of my catnip. KJ Charles also has like a Victorian fantasy romance series, and I just think it's so exciting because you'd think that would be so niche, and I guess in a way it is, but it's not so niche that there aren't other people who love it.
And it's no longer indie publishers. It does seem like more bigger publishing houses are actually putting that on the shelves.
Yeah, Marvelous Light got a lot of push and press.
Yeah.
And that's an illustrated cover that I think is successful at telegraphing.
I'll say this real quick. When the illustrated cover phenomena started, maybe 5 years ago, thereabouts, maybe 6, maybe 4.
Yeah, I think it's sort of circa Jasmine Guillory with The Wedding Date.
Yes.
It did, as a, on the sidelines, someone who has a pedestrian conception of what a romance novel is, it did make me look at it and say, oh, are romance novels, like, different now? It did make me sit up and take notice and make me think, like, oh, maybe I'll read one now. I don't know why. So it worked, even though I'm kind of giving myself as an example of the general.
Right. And I think that they can be a good gateway for people who are still, a little shy about reading them in public. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I was reading romance novels when I was way too young to be reading them. And
this is a very common phenomenon.
I lost any sort of shame that I had because of that exposure. But at the same time, it's just like, it can be good, and it's also, like we said, kind of like a sanitization thing, but it can go either way. Yeah. That's the problem.
I also find it makes it harder for my brain to hold on to, like, distinctions between books.
Yes.
Like, I don't,
that was the one thing I was going to worry about.
Yeah, is that
if you just breeze by with your just eyeballs real quick, you're going to think that they might be all the same author.
Right.
Which is the risk.
Also, as someone who, like, does enjoy an independent bookstore find that the romance offerings of many an independent bookstore tend to skew towards that trade paperback illustrated, which means that they skew contemporary, which is a very small subset of the genre, and which is often not what I'm looking for.
Right. And just going back to something from before, that can kind of run into a problem because, you know, for example, indie authors will more than likely not have access to these illustrated covers. They would probably use a lot of the same, you know, stock models or images over and over again. Like the cover for this book, I've seen used in several different ads, and every time I see it, I'm just like, wait, that's the cover from Wraith. What is that doing here? And I'm like, oh, meanwhile, it's fine, but it's just like, I don't want these authors, a lot of these indie authors who are doing a lot of the work to diversify this genre, getting overlooked, because you're right. Insofar as people who like to bash romance novels, there tends to actually be a romance novel for every single person. You just have to know where to find it. And if you are already apprehensive about the genre, it's not easy to just walk into a bookstore or even a library and be able to find those things. You have to like actually search for them a little bit.
Yeah. And on the one hand, like, so for example, we don't genreify we don't separate out our romance novels from our general fiction collection.
We have started to.
Which I know we have the stickers, which is very, very exciting.
Yes.
I've been to libraries in the past where, like, I mean, there is a separate section that is just wall-to-wall mass market paperbacks. And on the one hand, I'm like, that's great. Like, romance is a serious genre. It belongs with, like, the rest of fiction. Like, it should all be taken very seriously. And then some days I have days where I'm like, where are my jewel-toned mass market paperbacks?
Right.
With the dukes on the cover that I don't have to look too hard for.
Exactly.
So it's also, there's an ease of discoverability.
Right. And also the fact that there's so many layers to this. I didn't know we were going to talk about covers for this long, but the more I think about it,
does feel like it's worthy of an entire episode unto itself. Like, actually, we could do romance part 2 next time.
Because romance novels, I hate to say it this way, but I can't think of a better way to articulate it. The fact that so many romance novels are now being printed as trade is showing that they are willing to take the genre more seriously, these publishers, in a way, because mass markets, I love them. They can be a pain, but I do have an affection for them when it comes specifically to romance novels, because they're just these short, squat little thick books that are much cheaper than, they're about $10 cheaper than the trade paperbacks.
Affordable.
And they're so affordable. Right. And that's been a big comfort, is like, I've had points in my life where I'm like, kind of, you know, even when I'm kind of broke, no matter what happens on a bad day, I could always afford a mass market paperback romance novel. Yeah, I remember going to the grocery store with my mom, and she would just grab one of those, like, I call them penny. I don't know how much they actually cost, but you know,
they're 5 and 10.
Yeah, they're like, she just snatch one off the shelf and toss it in next to our cereal,
like,
and
it
would just be like,
item.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like, I know that in the times, because I have a bunch of siblings, that was like a little added comfort to her, where it's just like, okay, I can get this like cheap, feel good book and feed my children.
Sure.
And I don't want people to lose that to in this shift of like respectability with romance. So
because like, why does it have to be respectable? Like, I think there is something, I think it's the tension between, you know, like, they're books about feelings, which is why I think sometimes why they get derided a little bit, which is like, what does that say? Like, it's okay to care about feelings, and simultaneously, the respectability thing. It's sort of like, publishing now that that people, that you've decided it can make even more money.
Right, because romance has always been profitable.
It's so profitable.
To be completely honest with you, it always outsells. But I mean, just to like put on this hat, it also has a lot to do with who it specifically is believed to cater to. I mean, it's just like, oh, well, it's not these big serious books. These are just books that women like to read for fun or whatever. Nobody really cares that much. They're all silly, and it's all a shirtless Scottish man holding a sword. Nobody cares.
Right.
So it's easy to overlook just how much they can be and how much they are to a lot of people, because they're just women's books. There are quotation marks being made for those who cannot see.
Yeah, and I think that also ties in with something, because I did like kind of a deep dive on like think pieces about romance novel trend, like cover trends and things like that. And there's Kelly Jensen on Book Riot in like 2019 has an article about romance novel cover trends, and Maya Nunnally has an article about the aging down of women readers and how
interesting.
Yes, so this was a problem when Red, White, and Royal Blue first came out, is that it would get shelved in the YA section.
Oh my goodness.
It is not a YA book. It is an adult romance novel. And part of the problem is that Casey McQuiston is widely perceived as a woman. She's not. She's non-binary. But people were like, oh, here is this feminine presenting person, and here is this like gay love story, and it's got an illustrated cover.
Are the protagonists teenagers, or are they in their 20s?
They're in their 20s.
Goodness.
They're grown.
Yeah.
and that's also,
here you go, teens.
Yeah. Then that's the thing. And it's not that I think like teenagers couldn't enjoy that book, but it's not like YA is a marketing category in publishing, and it is not marketed under that category. And so, but I also see that happen with fantasy, like, you know, women's fantasy writing getting shelved lower, and it's like, well, no, that's an adult novel.
And the thing about that is that there tends to be, oh my goodness, now we're going to get into like my publishing pet peeves, which is that their new adult would be between YA and, you know, the quote unquote very serious adult literary fiction.
Does that mean like maybe college age?
College, I would say even to like my age, or like mid to late 20s, things like that, early 30s even. And there is kind of like a dearth of new adult fiction in general. So when it's written, it tends to get tossed into YA.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of the new adult books that I feel I've read have been romance books, and they are romance books, to be clear. But that also leads into the whole like, oh, let's age this down, because I don't feel like publishers, most bookstores, not grouping libraries into this because we have a built-in system anyway, but they don't know what to do with these books. So they're just like, if we put it as a YA book, it will sell more because YA sells.
And a lot of adults read YA, and so adults will find this book if we put it there.
Interesting.
But the problem with that is that you are putting an adult romance book in front of children.
That is complicated.
Yes. Yeah. Because I also openly admit, just to be clear, I was in the 8th grade when I read Gina Showalter's Darkest Night, which is a fantasy romance.
Which is a straight up chili pepper emoji spicy.
It is so spicy. Should not have been reading that. Well, I mean, it was spicy at the time. I've read spicier books now, but I'm an adult, so it doesn't matter. But to be fair, it was mass market. It had our Dude, Where's Your Shirt cover, and I went into the romance section like the precocious child I was, and I snatched it off the shelf and I bought it because they were not going to stop me. So, but I had to go out of my way to get that there.
And you had to have some idea of what you were getting into.
Exactly.
And no one handed that to you and said, here you go, 8th grade Rodi, here is a book for an 8th grader.
Right. And the thing about that is, so I don't believe in necessarily like censoring these books from kids, or like saying, oh, kids absolutely can't read that, because that would be hypocritical. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair to the genre nor to the authors to try to group genre their books in a way that is not what they are explicitly stating they are writing for. They're like, I'm writing an adult romance book, and then someone takes it and goes, oh, I'm just going to put this in YA now. That's not cool.
No.
So that's where I find the issue. Just make the kids go to the romance section.
Again, it is coming back to that cover issue, because the cover art trends lean into vibrant and sometimes pastel-y colors, and and you do see that lots of YA books have that color aesthetic.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yes, and I can think of several books.
The boundary blurs there.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to say how much I loved Mary Graham's comment about these books being about feelings.
Yes.
I think that completely shifted my whole perspective on it. Because when I pick up a book and I'm like, this is just about someone checking in with their own emotional health.
Yes. And
this is about someone figuring out what they want out of life.
Yeah.
And that's the book?
And getting
that's the
it.
book.
That is why the
And
happily ever after is important. It's not just that they figure out what they want from life. It's that you get to see them get it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's so wonderful. Mm-hmm. And yes. Okay,
and I think that's why, I don't know if we want to talk about like our favorite tropes or like things that really work for us, but I think that there are a lot of romances out there with what I sort of like to call banana pants plots, which like... It's, it's the Regency and here are 5 different things happening at the same time. And secretly you wonder if this was based on an episode of Leverage and like things like that, which, okay, there's a place for that. But all of my favorite romance novels, all of my favorite authors are writing very like historically grounded books without any of that banana pants stuff that's about people having feelings hundreds of years ago.
Yes.
And
which we don't hear about in the actual history books.
No, we don't.
Just to start with.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I you have to keep a tally of how many times I've mentioned her name in this podcast at this point.
5.
Beverly Jenkins does that so well because she's writing these historical romances, but she's writing them almost not just, but almost entirely about Black people in these times, and they're having feelings and they're going through their external issues, their sometimes internal issues, and they are navigating both of those things while also giving a full romantic experience.
Right. She's
so good at this. So good.
It's about dignity.
Yes.
Because there's dignity to that, right? And like thinking about same deal with queer romances as well, is that often when you're talking about these romances set in, 19th century Europe, England especially, is horrifically homophobic. And like, so yeah, you're dealing with those external pressures and these people still get to be happy. And that's completely plausible, actually. And just like between that and like other Rose Lerner is another one of my favorites, and I love her because she writes about like working class people.
Yes.
I think there need to be way more like working class romances in histories, in historicals, and yeah, it's just about like dignity. Like these people like this were here and they had feelings and they lived their lives and they wanted to be happy.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna get all like choked up.
And I don't know if like I wanted to put this on the table. I don't know, because you had said that when you were reading these in college, you had implied that your brain needed a break. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know whether or not escapism is a bad word.
No, I don't think it is at all.
I don't think so at all.
No.
Especially, oh gosh. Okay. I read
Beverly Jenkins.
No, okay. Well, she was one of them. Now, since you brought her up, I have to talk about her again. You did this to yourself.
6.
During 2020, because I'm not going to say during the pandemic, because we're still in one. I went through a reading slump, and then I picked up, since you had to mention it, this book by Beverly Jenkins called Captured. Mm-hmm. I read the book in a couple of hours. I literally just could not put it down. I was so enthralled. Mm-hmm. I finished the book. I heavily sighed, and then I flipped back to the first page and started reading it all over again. That is how strongly I felt about that book, and that is how bad I needed that book during that moment. Like, 2020 was a huge romance reading year for me because of that.
I can relate. Go ahead.
In May of 2020, I was reading about a book a day, and it was me rereading KJ Charles's entire backlist because she's my in case of emergency break glass author. And in particular her Society of Gentlemen trilogy, which is about a bunch of radicals basically in the Regency, in Regency London, like a time that notoriously had sedition acts and like cracked down on absolutely all political resistance.
Yes.
And like the massacre at Peterloo is a pivotal part of one of those books. And I was like, this is it, both escapism and also a way for me to directly cope with what is happening right now.
Yes, and especially, once again, as a person who loves history, it's just, like you said, it's nice to have history with feelings because so many, and there is a marked change in this with a lot of modernly written history books where authors are starting to insert or extrapolate the feelings of the people that they are writing about to like humanize them a little bit more. But it tends to be very dry. It tends to be very detached. And I think that that also helps with queer romances because one of the things that historians love to do, and just people who talk about classics in general, is just like they were just such good friends. They were the best of friends. They were so close, you know, just...
Or they'll say we can't say, as though that's definitive.
Right.
Whereas I, a queer person, I'm like, yes, you can't say.
Exactly.
You know, that's not the ace you think it is.
Yes,
right, exactly.
Yes, and like romance novels don't do that. They create a space in which you don't need to have that sort of, what's the word I'm looking, neutrality. You don't have to be neutral with romance novels. You can lean into an idea. You can lean into something, and like Mary Graham said, you can see it as a possibility, as a plausible possibility, and that's so hopeful. And it's so good to like get to read and see things like that.
It seems like it's a good sign that we're getting out of being unable to talk about those things.
Yes.
Because I don't think that the notion of queer romance novels, that's maybe a 15-year ago thing at best. Not even.
Because Cat Sebastian's been writing, I think, since 2016, 2015 or 2016.
In the 80s
To be
and 90s.
clear, not a thing in
traditional.
Once again,
Yes.
we have to give our indie authors their due because they have been doing the work for a very long time.
That's true.
Yeah.
But no, you're right in terms of like traditional publishing.
Yeah.
No,
I bring
not even
up Cat Sebastian because The Soldier's Scoundrel is this very, not frothy, but like, it's a classic Avon Regency romance with two men. And it's the first book I can think of that is like that, and it is 6 years old maybe. And so like, you're absolutely right.
It's this combination of two things, and unfortunately it's one more than the other, but it's a combination of, there's just homophobia, which is unfortunately the bigger issue, and it's also just like an immaturity, like it's that whole it's a Brokeback Mountain. Oh, two cowboys are gonna kiss? That's all that movie got distilled down to.
And
or Outlander. Oh, is it actually just a romance? It just gets distilled down to like, we can't grow up and get past the whole Fred Savage, Princess Bride, is this a kissing book situation.
my goodness.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, we will tell you why we laughed just now.
And the other thing is that obviously, you know, two gay cowboys makes an unfortunately large amount of that general population uncomfortable.
Right.
So that's a whole other episode.
And then also,
Which, like, sorry to you guys, I got some news for you about history and what cowboys
really quick,
got up to in real life.
I'm not saying that she's the first to do this, but Rebecca Weatherspoon wrote a romance novel centering a trans woman, and it was wonderful. And the character is mentioned in a previous trilogy, but she centers her as being desirable by not just, okay, hold on. You're probably going to have to like edit me muttering over myself. But the way she wrote that book, the dignity given to the characters, it was so good. And I know that we're going to get more. I know that there are other books written by non-binary authors. There's just so much in the romance genre that it's really hard to touch on everything. And it's so subversive in ways that it doesn't get credit for. And very, very random shout out to Chuck Tingle for writing the goofiest books, but also getting the most respect from like every single romance author that I've ever heard of.
Oh my goodness.
I have yet to come across a romance author who does not adore.
Well, that's because Chuck Tingle is so uncompromising about like, you will respect these other buckaroos, as he says, you know, like none of this gatekeeping, none of this, you will respect each other, gosh dang it.
Extraordinary, revolutionary, and marvelous all at once.
like they know these books know what they are, and everyone knows what. But Chuck Tingle, which I believe Chuck Tingle is two authors that I don't believe they are one person.
Don't ruin this for me, Rodi.
I'm sorry. I don't know who they are, but I do think it's multiple authors, and they are such a huge advocate in the field of like romance books while also getting to write books like this. They're just amazing.
Is absurdist an okay word, or is it something more intellectualized than that? Is it?
I think it's absurdism with a point.
Yes. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. So but it's also not satire, but it almost is. But this is very fascinating.
I'm
Chuck
so glad.
Tingle coming in at the episode's almost climax to like completely throw us off.
I had to throw that in.
That's amazing.
I'm not sorry. Ruminate on this for a while.
Sure. I think this has to become almost a monthly series. I think there's just too much to talk about. So we'll have to extraordinarily leave it right there as we look at book covers for Gay T-Rex Law Firm. Subtitle Executive Boner. I mean, that's great. Chuck Tingle. I didn't even get to, but I think this is, we open up so many great points. And one of the most amazing points for me is especially this historical aspect. And I guess just making visible the same-sex romances that did occur that just aren't talked about. Not even the setting aside that this is a historical fiction.
Right.
Right. Well, and also just the idea as well of queerness as a political orientation. So a trend that I'm really excited to start seeing is that I am seeing a lot more male-female romances with queer characters, because like bisexual people exist.
Sure.
And that is so exciting to me, like on a very personal level, and I think does a great job of illustrating that like norms are not eternal. Norms are something that we made up, and that there are always people who've lived outside of them in their own ways, and there are people who continue to, and that's all. Like there's this big continuity there, and on the one hand, like love is love, and simultaneously, like I think romance as a genre is a good way of saying like, sure, but it doesn't all look the same. Right. And it doesn't all mean the same thing. And it's not the same for everyone. And it isn't, and it shouldn't be.
Hell yeah.
Yep.
I've been completely enlightened, and now I want to read a romance novel.
I am so happy to hear this.
The end of the year is always, like, usually I spend just the month of December into January only reading romance novels. Yeah. And I can't wait to go put a bunch of stuff on hold now.
Yes.
That's great. Now, you'd recommended that, I think it's a trilogy by Hibbert. Is it Talia Hibbert?
Yes, the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is very close to me as a person because my last name is Brown. I have two sisters. My middle name is very close to Eve. I very, very much, like, I felt like she wrote that book and was just, like, looking me in the eye as she wrote it. And I was like, thanks. This is great.
That's great. I need recommendations for same-sex romance novels, too. So please let me know.
Oh, sure. Literally anything Cat Sebastian has ever written.
All right.
Although I also highly recommend her Regency Imposter series, which is men and women and non-binary folks, and as well as KJ Charles, who writes mostly same-sex couples. Yeah. This is all the good stuff.
Rebecca Weatherspoon writes lots of queer characters in both same-sex and, not same-sex relationships. She does also have non-binary characters. She does not follow any rules, and her books are very spicy.
Wow.
Also, Ali Theron, the Magic in Manhattan trilogy. Yes. I forgot to mention that, but that is set in 1920s New York with this sort of like Scooby-Doo gang that chases down these magical objects. Love it. And it's also very gay. It's incredible.
There's so many. We'll get you like a list after we're done.
Yeah. That's great. You both have to come back on the podcast immediately. It's been a great episode. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
And that was my chat with Rodi Brown and Mary Graham Hunter. Thanks again for being here, both of you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was a blast. I feel like if you are up for it, you should come back on multiple episodes, consecutive episodes, and continue bringing gentle schooling.
Absolutely.
I think that would be so much fun.
Because they're masters of the romance genre. You really showed me a lot today. So thank you for listening to this episode of A Little Too Quiet. It is Ferndale Library Podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And the music that you hear at the beginning and end of each episode is by a local musician known as Zunset. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can go to ferndalefriends.org, or you could like us, follow us, leave us a 5-star review maybe, leave a comment. It'll help us find more listeners. If you know folks out there like me who need gentle schooling on romance novels, maybe let them know about this episode, or maybe share it to social media. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.